So welcome everyone to our community college section, and this is a session on insights on student success, specifically in the community college ecosystem, because we all know that the community college ecosystem serves as a great pipeline for strengthening the STEM success in our institutions and all around the country. So we have a wonderful panel today of speakers. We have Jeff Shinsky from Foothill College, Rania Takidan from St. Charles Community College, which is St. Louis, Robin Carter from Phoenix College, Arizona, Robin Nagy from Houston Community College, Texas, and Stephanie Bloomer from Oakton Community College, Illinois. So we will never talk about time zones here because everybody's at a different time zone. And I really thank you all for joining. And we have a lot of people trickling in, which is wonderful. I'm going to keep my conversation short so that I can move on to our speakers. As we talked about before, many of our STEM majors, they complete their courses in a community college setting, but many of them, if you look at it, they are from the underserved student population. And what's very interesting that I had an opportunity to learn the last few years is half of all of the biology undergraduates that actually start their education at a community college, but very few small population of those students and their support and their successes are part of the biology education research papers. So with that, this session is going to provide some unique insights. It's also going to describe some of the experiences and the outcomes of the students in the community college world, because we think that this is a unique opportunity for all of us. So with that, I'm going to have our speakers start, and we have a keynote speaker, and that is Jeff Shinsky. And for many of us in this room, he needs no introduction, but I still want to introduce him because he's a good friend and a great mentor to many of us. He's a professor of anatomy and physiology at Foothill Community College in California. He conducts research in equity and inclusion in the science classrooms. But interestingly, he's also the co-editor-in-chief for the CV Life Science Education Journal, which can provide a lot of impetus and motivation for all our community college folks. He's been instrumental in getting many of us started who are in this panel in the research piece of community college education. And with no further ado, here is Jeff Shinsky.
Thanks so much, Sheila. It's really fun to be a part of this conference. I haven't been to this meeting before, and so that's a really great new development that I'm thankful to Sheila for introducing me to this, and I'm really excited to be here. I've long admired the work done by you all and the folks who are associated and affiliated with all of these programs. So it's really, really cool to be here. Sheila, that was all too kind of an introduction, and I just was going to briefly reiterate some of those things. I think that emphasizing our identities is so important, and bringing our identities with us to our professional spaces is so important. And given the wealth of time, I would have loved to have heard from every single person here more about who you are and what you value as a human, because I think it's so important to emphasize when we come together in community. But I'll say I am indeed from this beautiful college, Foothill College, and I just admire my students immensely there. I often say that my goal in life when I grow up is to be more like my students, because they're just the most amazing, hardworking folks I've ever met. I was a music major, and I have a Bachelor of Arts in Saxophone Performance, and so that's sort of part of my unique pathway to the sciences, and that's me second from the right there, having in one of my ensembles in college as a music major there. However, I also studied marine biology and did a lot of my work underwater and doing lots of scuba dives. And my graduate work was in the evolution of a fish that lives up and down the West Coast, where I am here in San Francisco. As Sheila said, I'm also a co-editor-chief of LSE, the Journal of Life Sciences Education. I have two awesome kids, Pax and Leon, who's with me here today. And so hopefully will let me be on Zoom for a bit here. And I've only put the Chicago Cubs symbol up there, which is the baseball team from Chicago, Illinois, because this is a a conference that's hosted by a Midwestern consortium of organizations, and I am originally from the Midwest. So I was born and largely grew up in suburban Illinois, only actually a few miles from Sheila's institution, from Sheila's school there. So kind of exciting connection there to the region that at least some of you are joining us from, even though I know we're across many time zones. And Sheila gave me the daunting task, I think, in some ways, of introducing community colleges a little bit to folks and their relevance and significance in this landscape, and then also sharing maybe just a couple insights from some work in the community colleges that relate to, I think, what we all are very interested in and this topic of education research as well, and especially as emphasizing inclusion and equity studies. So as you came into this session, there was a poll to reflect a bit. And I saw that we got 23 answers now. I think you can still do it if you like, if you're on our webpage for this session in Whova. But the poll asked this. It said, which of the following statements do you think are true regarding community colleges, which we often abbreviate CCs? And you could select as many as you wish. And this being a Whova poll instead of a Zoom poll, the only way that I know to share those results is to share my Whova screen. There might be a more efficient way to do this, but I'll just go over there and share my Whova screen where you can see some of these results on the right hand here. So you can see that about half of us think that maybe the majority of undergrads are attending US community colleges, and Sheila had something to say about that before as well. And so we'll get to that more in a second. Not so many of us thinking that the community college students are living on campus and staying in dorms. We seem more convinced that there's probably over 1,000 community colleges in the United States. And not so convinced also here again that community college students have relatively low success rates when they transfer. Again, not so sure, I think in general, that community college faculty are required to perform research and publish for tenure. Again, still a little uncertain about whether community college classes might include large classes with hundreds of students. A little bit split on whether research universities receive more public funding per student than community colleges, and fairly certain, it seems, across our participants here, that community colleges have open admissions that anyone who wishes to can attend. And I wanted to get us started with some of those because it got us all thinking about maybe some of our first thoughts that come to our minds when we think about community colleges, and also some of the characteristics of community colleges. And in my first few comments, I wanted to maybe address each of these statements a little bit. And in some ways, as you could probably guess just by the nature of this question, that they all are partially true and partially not true. And some are more so definitely true and others could kind of go either way. And so maybe in that sense, it was a bit of an unfair question because you couldn't say like, well, you couldn't say only sometimes when you were responding. So a few fast facts about community colleges to orient us here. There are indeed over 1,000 community colleges. This actually changes quite a bit from moment to moment and year to year as schools sort of combine and are spawned off and are opened up. But the last I checked just before we came together was about 1,044 community colleges in the United States. So I think that we were on track when many of us were thinking that was the case. On whether the majority of undergrads are in community colleges, it kind of depends what field you're looking at. So overall, most recent statistics show that about half, or 41% of all undergrads are at community colleges, which I think itself is striking because community colleges, in theory, are handling mostly just the freshman and sophomore years of people's experiences, whereas four-year institutions are handling those plus the additional junior and senior years. So there are a lot of folks in community colleges, even though in theory, they're only handling those first couple of years of students' work before transfer. And then if you go into STEM fields, you do start to see that the majority of them are there. So for example, 52% of all biology majors are at community colleges. And that seems to be a very similar trend for other STEM fields too. We also see quite large proportions of students of color, of low socioeconomic students, of students who are veterans, and other sorts of underserved populations of students in the community colleges. So many of these populations that we're really deeply, I think, enthusiastic about and impassioned about serving. 62%, the last statistics I could find, have open admissions in community colleges, which to me was actually surprising. That means that there's actually a decent proportion that do have some sort of application screening, whether that's a high school degree or residency requirements or other qualifications to get in. I just looked that up and I thought that was interesting. I thought that almost all of them were open admissions. Indeed, research universities receive 3 to 5 times more funding per student than community colleges. So it's actually not even close. It's just a dramatic difference in funding, in public funding per student. And this is also a mixed sort of signal depending on what statistics you look at. But I'll say that especially in my state, and I know the statistics from my state of California best, but community college transfers often outperform non-transfers at many institutions, and such that in fact, our community college transfers are in very high demand, and there's quite a bit of competition for them in California, because on the one hand, the community college students often help these institutions make progress on their diversity goals and their equity goals. But on the other hand, they're just like really great students. And so they get in there and they succeed, and they actually outperform the students that started there as freshmen. And so very proud to always, promote the success and amazing characteristics and resilience and perseverance of our community college students. I then wanted to give you, to answer maybe a couple of the other questions in our poll, I wanted to give you a snapshot of just a few examples of community colleges, because again, we have these over 1,000 colleges and we can't possibly learn about all of them, but they're just fascinating colleges. And I think that it's worthwhile to hear about a few of them. And I'll show you a map of the United States, and then it actually has some stars on it that represent various community colleges that I work with and part of my network. And Sheila's institution, and I think Robin Cotter's institution is on there. But I'm going to just highlight a few of them because I find them to be just an amazingly rich and diverse set of institutions that could be really, really exciting to work with. So for example, I'll point out here in Los Angeles area, Mount San Antonio College, which has over 50,000 students and over 70 just biology faculty. I often frame things in biology because that's my field, but that's a lot of biology faculty. That's more than many or most universities that I could think of. And I put that on there just to show that these can be quite large institutions that are a little bit more similar in feel to really a large university in some cases. And getting to that question about large classes, they can have very large classes. Oftentimes community colleges focus on providing really great, teacher to student ratios. However, even at my institution, there are some classes that have, 100, 200 person classes, not in biology, but in some of the other classes. So that's Mount San Antonio College. And we could compare that for something quite different to going up the coast here to Oregon Coast Community College, which has only about 2,000 students and is much more in a rural setting, and actually has one full-time science faculty member. That's not one full-time biology member, that's one full-time science faculty member for all the sciences. And that's my wonderful colleague, Matt Fisher up there. And I was just visiting up there recently, actually, on a trip up the coast here from my town. And so really quite different, obviously much, much smaller group of students and much, much smaller group of faculty that might be more similar to what we think of maybe with a community college. I put Kingsborough Community College going across the coast here to represent a more medium-sized community college, but actually, especially for that last line in the description there, that they actually do require research and publication for tenure and promotion. And so that's getting to that question about, are CC faculty required to do research? And some are. Kingsborough is not the only example, but it is somewhat unusual. And so those folks who are not so sure about that in our question are sort of on track in the sense that this is not a really common practice, but there are many community colleges across the country that do actually require some level of research and publication for advancement. And then finally, just for another example, to go to the Mountain West here, to Snow College in Utah, which is another rural college of about 5,000 students. And I put that on here because it is a residential community college. So this is one of the about 28 to 30% of community colleges that actually have dorms and students stay on campus. And so again, we were not so sure that in our poll that was the case. And there are actually a decent number. I mean, about 30% of community colleges that offer on-campus residential housing, including Snow College here. And frankly, it looks like a gorgeous place to live and be. So not a bad place to be living as a community college student. And finally, maybe I'll just, before we kind of wrap up this discussion of community colleges more generally speaking, maybe I'll show you one more set of statistics that I often show to folks, because I think that it presents a set of, really a set of charges for us and a set of maybe inspiration for where we can go. And I often show folks these two charts here. So again, we said about 52% as of 2019 of biology majors are attending community colleges at some point. But this from another study from 2019 also shows the proportion of biology education research that features a community college context, and it was about 1% or a little bit less than 1%, depending on what journals you look at. And this really, to me, has a lot of implications to get to this prompt at the top here, that we have, the majority of our students having at least some part of their experience in STEM fields in the community colleges. But then the research that we're doing to find out, what are the research-based practices and what are the needs and assets and challenges of students is really focused on not those students. Thinking as scientists here, this would be a really poor sampling of the population. If we were thinking about a study to understand like a particular population, whatever that might be, if we were reviewing that as a peer reviewer, we might think, oh my goodness, like as a field as a whole, we're not doing such a great job of sampling the population. And so we might not actually know for undergrads in general, what their experiences are, what their assets are, what they bring with them that they can offer as affordances, what the challenges that they experience are, and what the different interventions and activities and educational formats and classroom formats that best serve them and help to promote their success. Remembering most importantly, of course, that I think many of these students in the community colleges come from those populations that we most wish to empower and promote their voices. And their voices are currently not generally represented in this research sphere. So that certainly, I think to me and to many of us on this Zoom is a major call to action. And I think that really excitingly, based on everything that we've seen so far, presents just an enormous and exciting amount of opportunities for collaborations with community colleges. I think that you've seen now the different realm of types of colleges that are out there and the different contexts that we can think about in education for these community colleges. It's just amazingly exciting to think of all the different kinds of students that might be at a place like Snow College versus Oregon Coast College versus Mount San Antonio. So many different perspectives to share and so many different amazing sets of really inspiring students to learn from and to teach and to inform our practices. Frankly, so many places to work. And so people who are thinking about going into work in higher education, I think the community colleges present just an amazingly exciting realm for employment. But then as researchers, just like what an opportunity we have. Like we just have an understudied population that is there that offers so much for us to learn from and that is just waiting for us to, I think, empower them and raise their voices in meaningful ways and to partner with them. So that's maybe one of the biggest points I think that I wanted to emphasize, that Sheila wanted me to emphasize, and I hope that I've made that case, because I just find this like a really incredibly exciting place to be and an exciting position to be in. Then Sheila asked me to just briefly maybe mention a few of the things that have come out of collaborations with community colleges. And I think our other speakers will have some more examples of this, because there is some work underway and some work already completed that really represents nationwide and worldwide leading work coming out of and being inspired by community colleges that I think has been really influential. And so I want to talk about just briefly two of those projects that I've been involved in that I'm really excited about. So to start off with one of those, I wanted you to just think, and this will just be a moment of think time, about messaging regarding scientists in your courses. And actually to think back maybe to yourself as a student and taking science classes. I think that people in this Zoom have all probably taken science classes, whether it's in higher education or high school or middle school. So what, if any, specific examples of scientists have you encountered in courses you've taken? And what messages do those examples perhaps convey to you and to other students? So, you're in a science class, whatever that might be, whether it's in secondary school or primary school or higher education, think hard, like what examples of scientists did you encounter there? And what messages might those have sent in terms of who those scientists were? And we just don't get enough think time in our lives. And so I'm actually going to be quiet. I'm going to count on my watch here for like 15, 20 seconds, and we'll just be quiet and think about this. All right, so that was about 17 seconds or something like that. I'll say that as earlier on in my career, I was coming upon a lot of the literature that was saying that this messaging is just really important. That the ways that people perceive who succeeds and who is valued in a field has a lot to do with people's interest in a field, their persistence, and their success in classes in a field. And of course, I want my students to be excited about my field and to be successful in it. And so this seemed really important to me. And I began to reflect on these questions myself as a teacher, and I had a really quite humbling reaction, which was that in my own classes that I was teaching, I didn't think my students were encountering really any examples of scientists, like really literally zero, except maybe for one, which was me. I mean, I think that I really present myself as a scientist, and I'm very excited to be a scientist and to have done work in the sciences. And so if anything, maybe I was the one example of people doing science in that classroom. And that actually gave me even more pause, because I think that, given what you've seen about the community college student population, you can guess that many of the identity features that I have are not necessarily shared by my students. I mean, identify as a white, cisgender, heterosexual, non-first generation college student, a non-veteran man. And I look at my students and they don't have that exact set of identities that I do. They may share one or two of those, but they don't share that same set of identities as me. And again, the literature I was looking at was saying that seeing who succeeds and who is in that field is just so important to student success and student belonging. And so I got really worried. I actually wondered, should I even be a community college instructor, which frankly, I'm still worrying about and thinking about quite often. But beyond just running, screaming from my classroom, worried about my own role and my identities there, I wanted to know how we could actually shift this dynamic and change it so that I could not any longer say that the only example in the classroom was me. I wanted to really broaden those examples and make it in an authentic way that students would really hopefully connect with and value. And so one of the things that I came up with along with some colleagues was this intervention of scientist spotlights, where we really thought that we could change the world through addressing curricula. That curricula, what is studied and how it's studied in a classroom really drives what higher education is and how it progresses. And so that is like the institutional structure that we want to address, in some case reform, if we want to have institutional change in higher education. And this is one example of one of our scientist spotlights where a scientist is introduced. There's a little introduction to this scientist here. There's a link to some biographical information that goes more deeply into who this scientist is. And then there's a link to some of this scientist research where you can actually learn about some of the research they did. And that link to the research would be the teaching curricula part. Like this, in this case, would be integrated into the class in very authentic ways through like, hey, instead of doing a textbook reading, we're learning about that content through this scientist. Or sometimes instead of doing a PowerPoint presentation and lecture, we're going to bring this scientist's work into the classroom and learn about that content, those actually curricular goals through the lens of this scientist. And in that sense, it both serves to hopefully authentically, smoothly introduce more counter-stereotypical images of who can do science, but at the same time, does so in a way that meshes with the way that higher education and education in general works in terms of actually addressing curricula and making sure that's an authentic part of our class, as opposed to some sort of strange diversity sidebar that could be much more tokenizing or something like that. So this is much more authentic, we hope, way to introduce this content. So these scientist spotlights were something that we developed and that now has turned into a nationwide project funded by the National Institutes of Health. And that is the Scientist Spotlights Initiative, which is now in its fourth year of funding. And our goals were to engage undergraduates actually in service learning to create these scientist spotlight assignments. I mean, why should I be the one deciding which types of people get featured through scientist spotlights? My students should. And so we hand over the power of the curriculum to the students, and they get to decide, these are the types of people I would like to see featured in my classes. And they help to integrate with that with the curriculum. And they actually learn a lot about how curriculum works and some of the underbelly of higher education with that as well. And so now all of these are created by undergrads who are getting service learning credit for this. We developed then a searchable web repository of this, which now has about 400 and growing every day, scientist spotlights created by students and open to submissions from anyone. So your students or yourselves as well. I'll give this link to you here at the end here, but it's a lovely searchable website where you can find curricula from everything from biology to psychology, math, computer science, all kinds of fields where you can find scientist spotlights that can be hopefully relatively easily integrated into a course. And then, of course, us being researchers, we wanted to evaluate the impacts of these scientist spotlights in diverse classrooms, actually from middle school all the way through college. And again, this is funded by the NIH, which we're very thankful for. As researchers, we also, of course, did work to assess these. And I just wanted to give you the briefest of, I guess, sort of snapshots into some of our research, and then you can look at some of the more detailed research later. But these are representations of some of the students' descriptions of scientists at the beginning of a course. And then actually 6 months later, we actually saw longitudinal impacts, where it's not only at the end of the course after doing scientist spotlights that students change their ideas about who scientists are, but it's actually for months and months later that proceed. And 6 months in the life of a community college student could be like an eternity. I mean, so much can happen during that time. So we were just amazed that even 6 months later, we were seeing these changes in the ways that students describe scientists, and that we absolutely did not see those happening in our comparison courses where we did not use scientist spotlights. Further, getting back to that literature saying that, seeing diverse views of who can do a field helps to promote success, we indeed found, much to my surprise in some cases, but I was delighted, that students in these scientist spotlight classes compared to our sort of control classes were actually consistently and detectably earning higher course grades. And so they were actually learning more biology simply by learning it through the lens of a scientist who was from a counter-stereotypical background. And that we thought was really, really cool. So that's our Scientist Spotlights initiative. And in my last few minutes here, I just wanted to briefly tell you about the second thing that I was going to mention, of sort of a nationwide project that has gained a lot of traction based on community colleges. And for that, I just need you to, again, reflect very briefly about thinking of a course you've taught or remember from a student. So it could be a course you taught or that you were taking. And think about, what do you remember yourself or an instructor saying that was not content related? So stuff that was not about the topic in the curricula that you're studying, the other stuff that the instructor was saying, what were they talking about? And again, just like a few seconds here to think about that. Always fascinating to think about. What are we saying, or what are those instructors saying? So a group of colleagues and myself thought this actually could be quite important, because we think that we're saying a lot of things in our classes that are not just, mitosis, or like in a biology class, right? Or something about physical chemistry in a chemistry class. Like, we're saying a lot of other things. And we thought that this could have a lot to do with how students experience our courses, that it has to do with like those other things that we're saying that's helped to frame and set the culture of the classroom. So we actually studied this. We collected audio recordings of 61 entire courses, semester long, every single word recorded. Much easier to do now that we're in the Zoom land and people record their classes anyway if you're on Zoom, but we did this with digital audio recorders in the in-person classes. We then transcribed those recordings, and all the language that was about the topic under study was deleted. So everything about chemistry, or everything about the muscle system, or everything about mitosis was deleted. And everything that was left, we called Instructor Talk, this non-content language said to the whole class. And we analyzed that and coded it to see if there were certain categories. And indeed, we found some really striking categories of Instructor Talk that we think has a lot to do with kind of how students perceive our classes. I'll say, in the spirit of community college collaborations, this paper had over 60 authors, and over 30 of them were community college folks. And so this was an amazing collaboration that came out of the community colleges, and that now is having an influence nationwide. And to show you just a preview or a teaser of some of our results, we indeed found that, of course, there is Instructor Talk. There's non-content language in every class that we studied. However, it varies dramatically. Some teachers are using, or college instructors are using relatively little Instructor Talk. Others are using tons of Instructor Talk, which is fascinating. We were also actually able to code it into what we call negatively phrased and positively phrased Instructor Talk, which you can see represented by the color coding here. And the proportions of negatively phrased or positively phrased was different between different instructors in different classes. And so again, we just feel like the way that instructors present what their work they're doing, and the ways that they are presenting their pedagogical strategies can have a lot to do with how students perceive those. And again, just as a teaser for some of our results, these were 5 of the positively phrased Instructor Talk categories that we had. And think for a moment, you can read through them and think about, which do you think of these types of talk were most common in these college classes? So just read these for a moment and think about which bar here is going to be the longest or the most common. And so here are our findings. So it actually kind of more or less went from top to bottom here. But most often we see instructors building the instructor-student relationship, what I think is most fascinating about this is very few, if any, instructors are talking about the process of science in the field of science, which I was shocked by. My own transcripts have been analyzed this way, and I basically never did it. And this had a huge impact on me because I was like, I think that's important. I think we should talk about how our field operates and what the process of science is, and frankly, how it's exclusionary sometimes and how it can be more inclusionary, right? I actually wasn't talking very much about that. And this project changed me a lot. Like my instructor talk is very different now because of this project, because I saw my own results. And I've bought in. Like, I think instructor talk is kind of the underlying key or lever for why some things really work really well in class and other things don't work really well in class, and why some students have a lot of buy-in in their classes and other students sort of express more resistance to their classes. I think it has a lot to do with this. And that's kind of where we're going with this research now as we move forward, is to really study those connections. So this led to this framework. You saw these positively phrased categories here. Interestingly, in our transcripts, we found examples of the sort of mirror image negatively phrased versions of all of these. They exist. And so again, we think that like things like compromising pedagogical choices, which instructors seem to actually do quite often, interestingly, is a way that we maybe have students feeling like less buy-in to some of the strategies and maybe more resistance. And so these can have a lot to do with how students experience our classes and find their sense of belonging and community in a class. So with that said, I've just about perfectly hit my 8:30 mark here, so that's pretty good. I'm not making Sheila too mad. But there's just a ton of resources that I wanted to make sure was available to you, because these are all open source and available to you, and they'll be in these slides, which you can, of course, access, I think, later on. I can also paste these into the chat, but these are all links that relate to these two main topics or two main studies that I was telling you about here. So you can, at your leisure, explore some fascinating resources, both on Instructor Talk and Scientist Spotlights, of course, including our lovely Scientist Spotlights website there, where you can find inventions that you can use yourself. So with that, I think I will pass it back to Sheila.
Thank you, Jess. That was quick, fast, and deep all at the same time. I just want to make sure we have a few minutes, 5 minutes for questions. You can add it to the chat. I wasn't sure if this chat is seen by everybody. Is everybody able to see the Zoom chat, or do we need to use the WOHA chat?
Sheila, the chat in Zoom is disabled, so it'd have to be through WOHA.
Okay. So if you wanted to unmute yourself and ask a question, that may be much easier than you trying to get into the WOHA app right now.
That's good to know. So I repasted the resources into the WOHA chat there.
Any questions?
Good morning, Jeff. I'm a first-year PhD biology student, but I'm also a graduate of a community college too. However, my question may be a little naive. So I'm looking into teaching in an intimate college setting, and a community college is one because I've received an intimate college experience at a community college. But in terms of the research that you do you think that the variability that community colleges have are a factor within, I don't know, the student experience to measure?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that first of all, congrats on considering a career in community colleges. I would never discourage that amongst anyone. I think that it's one of the best jobs in the world possible. So good for you for exploring that. And yeah, I think that obviously the work that I've done in my own community colleges, which I love and adore those students, that may or may not be super relevant to folks at like Snow College, right? Which is a very different, a rural college with very different demographics, predominantly white institution, that compared to my own community college. And so I don't think that we can solve all the problems in terms of the education research we do by just picking a few community colleges. I think that what's really exciting about the community colleges is that looking at them as this amazing nationwide system as a whole, that the more and more people we get on board to share the experiences of their students, the more and more of those perspectives from different types of community college students we'll start to see. So yeah, I don't think that everybody necessarily needs to come to Foothill College and do all that work at Foothill, though I would love that. I think that the diversity of types of colleges and college experiences out there, as you were saying, are just a real opportunity to to collaborate across those institutions and see if there are similarities and see how those student voices are reflected in those different contexts.
Excellent. Thank you. Wonderful presentation, by the way.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
I see somebody's hand is up. I think it's Catherine.
Yes, hi, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you for your presentation. I was curious, at your particular college, how many students interact with some of the affinity-based professional technical organizations that support undergraduates? So like Society of Women Engineers and National Society of Black Engineers. Is it relatively easy for students to get connected with those?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And because I really admire all those societies. And I think the one that maybe has some traction at my institution is SACNAS. So I think that there's a decent amount of, or at least compared to the others that you mentioned, probably SACNAS has a bit more engagement than others. There's also a group that's not exactly an affinity group in that sense, but there's a global brigades group that's actually really popular where they do a lot of service work for underserved communities, and back before COVID days would travel to Central America and do work there in the health sciences. But I think that from community college, there's just very different cultures around, like, club involvement and sort of broader involvement. Some community colleges, as I was showing, like, are much more feel like a university where students are deeply, they're on campus all the time, they're hanging out on campus, they're in clubs, they're involved in, in local professional organizations, like you were saying, through their institution. And there's much more of a campus sort of climate in terms of being engaged on campus and with those clubs. Other places that, the students are so focused on working full time while having 2 kids, while going to college, and it's much more of a commuter feel, and there's less sort of broader engagement with societies and with other groups. But I think that those are fantastic groups, and like I'm always promoting those conferences and meetings for those groups, because I really hope that our students will get more involved in them. And yeah, it's something that I'd be curious about. I think that that's something that could be studied, right? Is like the impact of involvement in these kinds of organizations among university versus community college students. Like, to what extent are community college students more or less involved in those than university students, and what are the impacts on community college students compared to university students? I think that would be a lovely area to further investigate, because I don't think people have explored that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I had one for Jeff before he finished up his talk. How did you get started? Because I think that's probably a question that a lot of community college instructors have. How did you get started, and where did your journey begin? And
yeah, well, how far back do you want to go? No,
just key milestones that would help us as we think about how to get started.
I think that maybe a few of the key things is that teaching is sort of in my family. Like I could start to list off the many cousins, grandparents, parents, siblings who are teachers, and so that's always been in my blood in some extent. In graduate school, I thought I wanted teaching to be a major part of my career, but I wasn't sure exactly how so. I did not attend community colleges, frankly, much to my my disadvantage. I think I would have actually much preferred community colleges to my university experience to start off. And so I really didn't know much about community colleges, and which is a shame. I really should have known more. And so I really wish I'd known more. But in graduate school, one of my graduate student colleagues was talking to me and said, like, oh, hey, from what you're saying, Jeff, it sounds like community college teaching would be really a good fit for you. And I frankly went home that day and started Googling around about community colleges, because I knew very little about it. And the more I learned, the more I thought it actually might be a good fit. And so in my last semester finishing up my graduate work, I started part-timing in 2 community colleges, and immediately was hooked. I mean, again, like, the students are just so phenomenal. They just floor you. They're the most hardworking, amazing, brilliant people in the universe. And yet they're not getting the advantages that I had. And I felt like, if I were a student and had to have half the challenges they do, I never would have made it. I never would have made it through college. And it just made me want to try to find out how to empower them and again, center their voices instead of, voices like my own in some cases. And so that was just really exciting to me. And that launched me into this and made me really want to do this as a career. And then I think in terms of the education research, I simultaneously was worried about like, well, okay, if my career is mostly going to be around teaching, how am I going to scratch this itch of science? Because I definitely like science. I feel like a scientist. I love doing science. I love collecting evidence and trying to base my decisions on evidence. And so I was very concerned about entering a real teaching heavy career without that research piece that I just really love. And then I was exposed again in graduate school to the concept of education research. And it blew my mind that like the classroom could be a source of evidence collection and a place to do this science that I love so much. And so again, the community college was just the perfect fit for that, to be primarily situated in a teaching field, teaching realm, but to have this amazing opportunity to still collect evidence and try to share with the world the voices of my students through the process of science.
Thank you, Jeff. And with that, we'll probably have virtual claps. Thank you so much. It was amazing. There were some chats in our Zoom that was disabled that you probably didn't listen to or read. Everybody said this was, many of them like Robin, they love scientist spotlights. They've used them in the classroom. Stephanie Bloomer wants to try this. So I think we have got a lot of people really excited after listening to you. So thank you, Jeff, for coming and sharing your awesome experience and also allowing the community college experience to be known to everybody. So with that, our next speaker is going to be Rania Takeden. And Rania is an assistant professor at St. Charles Community College, St. Louis. So we're coming from California right to the Midwest and the St. Louis, Missouri. She has a background in dentistry, public health. She also teaches biology and A&P courses at her college. She's deeply involved in enhancing professional development for faculty with a lens of equity and inclusion at her college. And with that, I want to welcome Rania Takeden.
Thank you, Sheila. Good morning, everyone. It's such an exciting opportunity to get to share our work that we're carrying out at community colleges. And, you know, get ideas, brainstorm, research design and all. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing at St. Charles Community College for science. You know, equity is a big idea in many disciplines, specifically in science, and specifically after this pandemic. Is learning the same for all students? And are we providing those learning opportunities with equity in mind for all students, whether they are face-to-face on campus or if they are distance learners? And so I'm going to share with you my experience. And with all honesty, this did not just come up because of the pandemic. It was not in response to that pivot to online teaching. I actually was teaching human biology, which is a course for non-majors. It's a general ed requirement for students. And I actually inherited it when I was first appointed to this course. And so I had no say on the logistics or how this course was actually offered. As we all know, that when students are learning about the human body, they need to have opportunities, hands-on opportunities to reinforce their learning, specifically about our big core concept in biology for undergraduates, which is the relationship between structure and function. They have to build a vocabulary, and that necessitates that we offer them these opportunities, which we call labs, right? And so the lab we had was offered only on Mondays. We had one room, which we share with our AP courses that we offer. And you know, students, they have jobs, they have responsibilities. And so that Monday offering was not always the best offering. So enrollment was another issue that the college was considering. And so I was thinking of going online to address these challenges that we had, to offer an online opportunity for students to take the human biology lab and really support them in their learning. And then came the pandemic. And so it became a necessity to provide our models and our materials to all students, not only those that are enrolled online. And so, you know, in response to this, we need to think about interactions. So we're thinking about interactions that are very important in the teaching and learning environment. The social interactions between instructor and students, as well as among the students themselves. And we know that our educational literature and literature into human biology, as well as online learning in general, is always talking about the importance of content interaction. How do students engage with material and its impact on student learning outcomes? And so these are very important things to consider for design, because you don't have the students with you in the lab to interact with you as an instructor or to interact among one another. We know that there are discussions online, discussions in different learning management systems, but how do we actually reinforce engagement with material? That was going to be the challenge for designing our online lab. And so we went back to the literature and we were thinking about Big's work in constructive alignment. And when we're thinking about constructive, as you know, we're talking about what the student does. And when we're thinking about alignment, we're actually thinking about our objectives for the lab, as well as the assessment. And so we could easily say that we have the same objectives for this lab for students that are taking it in both formats, and we could use the same assessments. But would that really be the same learning environment for students that are taking these different formats? And so we had to consider constructive alignment, where we wanted to develop learning activities that engaged our online learners in a similar manner to those that were on campus, and then to all learners once that pandemic did hit. And therefore, that would actually level the playing field, so that when we looked at assessment and we wanted to argue whether online learning in labs works for all students, we would actually have the data and the evidence to do that. And so the college that I'm working at, St. Charles Community College, has a great distance learning team. We have instructional designers, and they came up with this academy in which you would submit a proposal for an idea you had in your course, and they would support you. And so my proposal was selected to join this academy. And we would meet weekly every Friday, discuss scholarly resources on course design, educational theory, educational technology. And then we were also exposed to different types of tools that we would be able to select from to implement in our projects. And so my project goals were really about designing interactive learning activities, and I wanted to engage my diverse learners. As you know, in community college, as one of the questions came up, there's a lot of variation in our student population that we teach. And so I wanted to keep that diversity in mind when I was designing these interactive activities. And I wanted to, as much as I could, replicate the in-person experience of learning. I also wanted to promote that constructivist processing, so that students would be learning by doing, which is really important in all learning, specifically in our lab environments. And I wanted to provide timely feedback. And we have a lot of literature that talks about the importance of feedback and the timing of the feedback to actually support students in mastering vocabulary and attaining the outcomes we want for our courses. And then I also wanted to shift that learning experience and give that responsibility to students to ensure that they met these objectives. I wanted them to be my partners in design. They have great ideas for sure. And so I basically used a tool which is called H5P. And that actually allows you to take images and videos and to author different activities to engage your students. So I would take models from my lab, similar to what students would use in the lab, and you would create hotspots where they would hover over this hotspot, and it would actually give them the name of the structure and some information that I would want them to know. Similar to what we would do if we were doing a presentation or a demonstration in the lab. And then I could also have them drag and drop some items so that they could match the structure to its location. And I could actually use models that we had very few of, so many students could interact with. So the Sarkometer model is very expensive, and with the community college lab budget we have, we can only afford one for our labs. And so that was another thing that was a problem, for students to actually gain access to practice with these different models. And I could actually use videos that would help students learn how to use tools in the lab that were important and they couldn't have access to when they were, being taught remotely due to the pandemic, or if they missed the lab class, right? And so we had to keep in mind as we were assessing our project and these interactive learning activities, specific criteria of universal design of learning. And that's where you want all learners to have access to these tools, right? Regardless of the diversity that we see in our student population and their needs. And so I use the universal design principles as not only a grading framework, but also as part of the rubric that I use to assess these interactive activities that I had for students online. And I would create a survey that actually covered these principles and ask students after every activity what their perception of their learning was. Was this tool useful? And I'd ask them for suggestions to make it better. And it was amazing, the ideas that they gave me for ways to modify my project as it progressed during that pilot. And so the big question is, does it work? So we do know that there's literature that actually talks about integration of innovative online learning tools. And we know that this works, but we don't have any evidence about it in the community college level. And so that is going to be very important to take into consideration the community college context, because as Jeff was talking about, we have a high percentage of students that we are serving at community colleges. And we really want to support their learning and meeting those core concepts and competencies that were in the Vigilant Change report. And so we need to address the challenges that we have in community colleges, and specifically when it comes to collecting evidence of the effectiveness of tools that we implement in our classes. And so one of the challenges I'd share with you is that in community colleges, we sometimes have difficulty in accessing that social network where you can actually interact with your peers in discussing design of an experiment, the best type of data to analyze, to reach a good answer to your question of whether things work or not when you implement them. So one of the ideas that came up out of going through the academy and doing my pilot last semester was, I really want to know what are the factors that are significant for creating a high quality online science lab experience for our students at the community college level. And I would like to know that from an instructor perspective, because we know that students' perception is really important, but the instructor's perspective is important as well. How can we share that with our peers in community colleges so that we can actually advance this more and see it in multiple colleges as well? And so I would love to hear any suggestions, ideas that you have. This is a great opportunity for us to grow in that side as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rania. So we have some time for questions. The idea was to just explore and talk about what's happening in the community college section in various institutions. So if you have any ideas, feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand, however you want to do.
Rania, that was a great presentation. I really like that tool. Is that something that you could share with the group? And is it something that requires you as the instructor to purchase access, or did the students also have to purchase access to the tool?
That's a great question. So H5P is actually an authoring tool and it needs a license. And so part of our project was actually to submit a mini grant, what we call, to ask for the license for this tool to use. But once you get access to it, you know, if you share these tools that you develop, you can share them publicly. Students don't have to pay anything for it. You can embed it into your learning management system and, you know, create as many of these tools that you want. It's not limited, but there is a cost, that's for sure. You are welcome.
Is there a learning curve for this kind of a tool implementation?
And so that's a great question, Sheila. Actually not. It seems our digital learners have the experience coming in. And so, you know, I would talk to the students and sometimes they'd be rolling their eyes of me going into the details and the steps that you need to go through, because it was just something that was intuitive for them, right? And, you know, part of those principles, you know, for UDL is really making it simple for the users to use, regardless of their ability. And so, you know, it would just take formulating a little sentence on the top, telling students what was required, you know, just drag and drop, you know, the correct term to the structure that it relates to, and then hit on that little check to check your work. And so they could get feedback right away. And so apparently it didn't, although I did actually use previous publishing tools that were interactive, and that did require learning curve, starting with access codes and all of that. So this was just embedded into the Canvas shell. They were required to go over it, you know, submit their survey once they were done, and we were good to go.
That's interesting. That was wonderful. I mean, we all learn as we listen to each other. If you have any questions, you can always add it to the WUHA app. That's where the chat function is allowed. We'd love to hear more, Rania. So thank you very much for sharing. So we're going to move on and to our next speaker, and here's thanks and awesome presentation, Rania. So our next speaker is Robin Carter. She's a professor of biology at Phoenix College, Arizona. So we are crisscrossing the nation as we go. She has a background in pathology, neurovirology, microbiology. She's also a PI on STEM Cure program, which is very interesting because it's interdisciplinary, multi-institutional, and the goal of that program is to improve the sense of belonging in science in the lens of underserved students. But I also wanted to add that she's a good friend, a wonderful cheerleader for much of my professional growth and many others that who come in contact with her. So with that, here is Robin Carter.
Good morning. Thank you, Sheila. And that is true. One of the best things about being part of Bio Insights, which is a community college network of biology education researchers, is getting the opportunity to work with people like Sheila and Jeff. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this today, Sheila. As Sheila said, I'm Robin Carter, and I teach at Phoenix College. And Phoenix College is a 2-year community college in the heart of Phoenix, Arizona. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about finding the STEM cure, how our college developed and implemented community-based cures, and then assessed their impact on our students. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about me and my journey. So I was born and raised in Indiana. I am a Hoosier. And 2 things that I love the most are in Indiana, my family and basketball. So I am pleased to be here at the Midwest LSAM conference today talking to each of you, because in a way it's like coming home. I started at DePaul University as a first-generation college student myself. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to go to Kenya and participate in an undergraduate research experience. That experience inspired me to go on to graduate school and become a research mentor myself. I started first at Arizona State University, and then I found my way home to Phoenix College, and I've been teaching microbiology and biology for majors there for the past 16 years. Okay. I'm also proud to be part of the LSMRCE Alliance here in Arizona. We call it the Western Alliance to Expand Student Opportunities. And here you can see me with some of my 20 students that I have mentored through WASO over the past 5 years. I'm not sure why, but my computer is being a little slow today. I want to tell you also a little bit about my college and my students. So Phoenix College is a community college, as I said before, in the heart of Phoenix, Arizona, and it's a 2-year Hispanic serving institution. And more than 56% of our students identify as Hispanic or as Latinx, and 71% of our students are first generation. Our students are full-time or part-time workers. You will find that many of them are part-time students, and they're trying to balance everything from jobs to family to schoolwork. So we had heard a lot about the impact that undergraduate research could have on students, particularly in STEM pathways. And this led us to want to study what kind of impact it could have on students at community colleges. However, one-on-one research experiences are limited at the community college due to limited space and time. So we began to explore what are called course-based undergraduate research experience, or what are known as CUREs. And our college was interested in developing CURes because we had heard that they could increase equity inclusion in STEM. They had been shown to improve student learning outcomes at 4-year institutions, and they had also been reported to increase interest in STEM career pathways. For those of you who may not be familiar with CURes, they are research experiences that are embedded into the existing curriculum, and students in CURes collaborate and work together to address research problems that are relevant to the local or scientific community. And the focus is on applying scientific practices to lead to novel discoveries. So our research question that we were interested in answering was, how do community and industry-based CURes impact students at our 2-year Hispanic serving institution? And we wanted to look at the impact on project ownership and science identity, scientific literacy, and persistence. And today I'll be sharing some of the preliminary results that we found from this study. As part of an NSF-funded STEM CURE grant, we have been able to engage over 687 students in undergraduate research. And our CURes are different in that we partner with local industry and community organizations to provide our students with the opportunity to network and participate in research that is relevant to them within the community. Students meet with local partners to develop the research questions, then they come up with their own research plan, which they implement, and then they share their findings back with the interested stakeholders. Our community partners have also provided our students with the opportunity to do internships after completing the CURE. So we have been able to engage our students with over 21 different local and community partners, including government organizations such as the USDA. We've also partnered them with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, as well as with industry such as APS and Banner Health, and nonprofit organizations like the Phoenix Zoo. Well, I don't have time to talk about all of the different CURes that have been developed at our community college. We did develop CURes for STEM majors, and this is traditionally what is done at 4-year institutions in our Biology 181 and 182 classes. Some of these CURes focused on topics like honeybee microbiomes, partnering with the USDA and our local university, Arizona State University, and others looked at urban bat ecology, partnering with Northern Arizona University, as well as Arizona Game and Fish. While not all CURes focus on non-STEM majors, we know that they're an important population at our community college. So we also developed CURes in our Introduction to Biology 108 and Psychology 101 classes. These CURes partnered with local nonprofits such as the Phoenix Zoo and Kids in Focus to provide a service learning aspect. The students went out, they met with the nonprofit organizations, they asked them what type of needs they had, and then the students developed research projects to help address those needs. The CURe that I would like to share with you today, though, is the one that was developed for my microbiology for allied health students. And this cure wanted to raise the awareness about biological and chemical contaminants in water and the potential risk or impact they can have on the local environment and human health. As you can see here, my students went out to a local water treatment plant where they collected water samples from different stages of the water treatment process. The students then analyzed the samples for the presence of potential pathogens, chemicals such as nitrates and microplastics. And then the students reported their findings back to the stakeholders. The students were invested in knowing what was in their water, and they wanted to find ways to reduce these potential contaminants to make the water safer, not only for them, but for their family and friends as well. We then wanted to assess the impact of cures on our students. And I've got a confession to make. I am not a biology education researcher. So I had to become a student again, and I had to learn how to conduct this type of research. So what we did is we went out and we explored what other institutions who implement cures were using to assess the impact of cures on their students. And we selected several published and well-developed surveys, including the Persistence in the Sciences survey, which looks at aspects such as project ownership, self-efficacy, science identity, scientific community values, and networking. We also looked at a survey that was developed for engineering students, looking at science identity and self-efficacy. And we also wanted to look at the impact of cures on scientific literacy. So we used the test of scientific literacy skills. Each of these surveys were administered within the first 2 weeks of the class prior to the start of the cure, and the surveys were administered again at the end of the semester during the last 2 weeks of the course. For each course that included a cure, a control section taught as a traditional lab was taught by the same instructor for comparison. Today, I'm going to show you just some of the results. These are some of the results for the microbiology for allied health cure. We looked at scientific literacy skills, and as you can see here, between the pre and the post, students who participated in the cure related to water contamination had a significant increase in their scientific literacy scores as compared to students who participated in traditional lab activities. We found that the students in the cure showed significant gains in aspects such as research design and the use of scientific evidence. And we attribute that to the practice the students received through the implementation of their own research project in the cure classroom. We then wanted to look at other outcomes as well. And so we began to explore the Persistence in the Sciences survey by Hanauer. This survey has been used to look at aspects such as project ownership, science identity, and self-efficacy. And we wondered, could this tool be used to assess our students? However, what we have begun to discover are that most of the tools used to assess cures were actually developed and validated for use with students at four-year institutions. And as you can see on the screen here, the demographics of our community college don't match the demographics of the institution they were developed for. While only 1% of the students that were used to validate the survey for the PITS were Hispanic or Latino, we have over 56%, and in our study, 58% that identified as Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish. The PITS survey only had 2% that identified were reported as Black or African American, where our student population associates with 11% of Black or African American identities. While we had several populations that were consistent with the PITS for Asian and Pacific Islanders, the PITS survey had 52% of the students responding that were white, whereas only 14% of the students on our campus identified as white. So we began to wonder, could this assessment tool effectively assess the impact of cures on our students? I'm going to show you just one component or construct from the PITS survey. This is called the project ownership. And we asked students this question to identify whether or not they felt their research would help to solve a problem in the world. On the right-hand side, you can see that students who participated in the cure had a stronger belief that their research would indeed help solve a problem in the world than students who were in the traditional taught non-cure class. We went on to ask them a second question related to project ownership, and the statement was, "My findings were important to the scientific community." Again, students in the cure more strongly agreed that their research findings were important to the scientific community as compared to control students. We also wanted to look at the impact of cures on science identity. So we used the Godwin Science Identity survey to help us do that. And I'm sharing one of the items from that survey that states, in the past few months, I have really felt like a STEM person. This survey was given at the beginning of the semester and again at the end. And what we measured was a gain in their attitudes about whether or not they felt like a STEM person. What you see shown here are the mean gains for both control and cure students. And you can see that cure students had a larger gain, indicating that they did feel that they had a stronger science identity. We also found that STEM cures have an impact not just on the students in the classroom, but for the students who are mentoring those students. And we found that STEM cure leads to a sense of belonging for all students who participate in them. I'd like to share a quote from just one of our many student mentors who assists with the cures in the classroom. And Crystal said, I felt accomplished and proud of myself because I felt comfortable explaining the material to them. It made me feel like I can eventually have a place in the science community. So what we are seeing are that, yes, cures can have impacts on scientific literacy, but cures can have larger impacts and really affect the way a student feels as if they do belong to the scientific community as a whole. And then we wanted to look at some more traditional metrics of success. So we reached out to our institutional research office and we looked at the impact of cures on completion and success rates. The values that I'm showing you here were for the Bio 205 Microbiology for Allied Health class, which enrolls not only allied health students, but also STEM majors. As the majority of students at our campus are female or identify as female and identify as first generation, what I decided to share with you today is the data for female first generation students. Allied health students are not typically targeted with cures, but you will find that students that were in a non-cure class for allied health had a completion rate of 97%, but that increased to 100% when those allied health students were enrolled in a cure. Allied health students in a traditionally taught control class had a 93% success rate of a C or above, and those students improved to a 98% success rate when they were enrolled in a cure. Traditionally, cures are taught with STEM majors, so we wanted to do a comparison. And again, we found that STEM majors also benefited from being in cures. Non-cure students had a 93% completion rate compared to 100% completion rate for STEM majors. And we saw a small but modest increase in their success rate as well, from 87% to 89%. And similar trends were also observed for first generation males that were enrolled in this allied health cure course. We also wanted to look more long-term. Could cures have an impact on transfer to a 4-year program? And so we reached out once again to the institutional research office and they provided us with this data. What they found were that students who didn't identify as STEM majors, which would also include allied health, who were not in a cure but in traditionally taught classes, 12% of them would transfer to a 4-year STEM program in the 2019 academic year. Whereas 20% of students who didn't identify as STEM majors were transferring to 4-year STEM programs. Cure students had a 22% transfer rate. And what was interesting to us is if a STEM major also had taken a cure, they had a 28% transfer rate to a 4-year university in the STEM program. But this really began us to reflect upon whether or not transfer rates are really the best metric of success. And I want to bring you back up to the top of the slide here, which shows student intent. When students enter our community college, they're asked the purpose for why they're attending. And only 38% of our students indicate that their intent is to transfer to a 4-year university. 34% of our students plan to get training to enter in or advance in the job market. So this has really led us to reassess how we should be determining what success is for community college students. Is it just transfer to a 4-year university, or could it also include workforce training and advancement? Something that's not commonly reported on in the literature. So I know I'm almost at time, and so I want to make sure I don't go over. What we found is that cures do increase scientific literacy skills, improving the students' research design and scientific evidence use skills. It does lead to project ownership. It does increase science identity. And while we have seen modest increases in completion and success, What was interesting to us is not only do STEM majors benefit, but allied health students benefit as well. And then the final thought I'd like to share, because I know Sheila needs me to wrap up, are that what we have discovered as community college faculty are that there are very few tools that were created and validated for use with our population. So we're currently working to perform our own validation studies to see, do these instruments really work as intended for our student population? We're also increasing our sample size so we can look specifically at the differential impacts of cures on specific demographics such as first generation, Hispanic and Latinx students, as well as the differential impacts on STEM versus non-STEM and workforce development students. And with that, I would like to thank you on behalf of our team for letting us attend your conference today and share the work that we're doing.
Awesome, Robin. This is great. Thank you very much. So any questions for Robin?
And I'm sorry that I went over it. As you can tell, I get really passionate about the work that we're doing. I know that it can have positive impacts for our students, and I encourage anyone who's interested in developing cures for their population to reach out to us.
So Robin, I had a quick question. There's a very interesting work done on cures by many institutions, but I really would like you to talk about, this is probably the first of the few that has allied health importance given, and also the workforce success, because at sometimes transfer is not the only thing that our students are looking at. How did you come up on this idea, and when did it dawn on you to triangulate these components together?
Well, I teach microbiology for allied health students, and having been a first generation student myself who benefited from undergraduate research, I wanted to share that experience with my students. And when I did, I found my allied health students were just as engaged as my STEM major students. And then when I started to research the literature, I could only find 1 or 2 papers that even mentioned the use of cures with allied health students. So I feel like they're a neglected population. In the past, non-majors have often been left out of these types of studies, but I feel all students can develop skills that are essential to the workforce by participating in cures. And then right now, equity and inclusion is a major focus on my campus, as it should be on everyone's campus. And we really started to look at the parameters and metrics used to define success. What is interesting are that most of those metrics were developed by 4-year institutions for their population of students, but their students have different goals than our students. And so we really want to make a call to action for other community colleges and faculty members to reassess what success means for our students. Students define what success means for them, and it may be transfer to 4-year university, but it could also be successful training for entry into workforce.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is also Robin Nagy. She's the program coordinator for IDES Academy from Houston Community College, Texas. Her background is in earth science and geology, but her work at the San Diego Museum of Natural History and the great work that she has done at the Houston Community College makes her a valuable member of our bioscience interdisciplinary community. Her work, especially with IDES, stands and works towards preparing students with mindsets and skill sets needed to address the challenges of the 21st century. I have really enjoyed listening to a lot of speakers on student mindsets, because I think that has a lot to do with the growth career and the success of our students. So with that, Robin Nagy is here to present.
Thank you. I am, like Jeff, I also did not attend a community college. I went straight to a large R1 research university. And it wasn't until several iterations of grad school that I really honed in on the idea that community colleges are teaching focused, and that having a career in the community colleges would allow me to connect with students and B, really centered around teaching them and seeing their growth as learners and as people. And it would allow me to be much less focused on the sort of publish or perish mentality of larger research institutions. And so I knew I wanted to be involved in community colleges. And so I started teaching geology courses, and I became involved with some professional development through another NSF-funded program called SAGE, which is supporting and advancing geoscience education. So it was specific to my discipline, but it really focused on active learning and other inclusive teaching strategies. And I started to become really aware of the power of different pedagogies and instructional techniques to really close the achievement gap and include and support all of the students that were in my classroom. So that became a real focus for me. I became a SAGE change agent through the NSF program, and I did a lot of professional development on various interventions that can be incorporated in any classroom, not necessarily specifically to geology, and then became involved in our LSAMP program at Houston Community College. So at HCC, we are together with San Jacinto Community College here in the Houston area. We represent the Harris County Community College Alliance LSAMP program. It's a lot of C's in there. And so what I really wanted to bring to the table to our LSAMP program was this idea of metacognitive capacities for helping students to build their sense of belonging in STEM fields and in community college in general. And then that sort of evolved into wanting to bring some mindfulness awareness into what we offered to our students. So our LSAMP program offers students the opportunity, they self-select into one of three what we call communities. So we've got community of scholars, community of research, and community of experience. The activities that I'm going to talk about today fall under the umbrella of scholars. And our goal with Community of Scholars is to primarily help students network and form informal social connections, as well as increase their awareness of resources available to them at HCC and just build sort of study skills. And then, of course, this mindfulness component. Students in community of research attend research seminars and work towards internships that we have with partner institutions. Students in the community of experience do a project-based, challenge-based learning sort of year-long thing. So before I dive into it, I'm going to actually practice what I preach here. And we are going to take 1 minute of our time today and do a guided meditation. So I'll talk a little bit about the reasoning for this in a minute. But in the meantime, I would like you all to put down any pens or pencils or paper that you have. Take your hands off of your keyboard. Sit back in your chair and just take a really nice deep breath. Inhale through your nose and exhale out through your mouth. Do that a couple of times. And as you exhale, draw your attention to your neck and your shoulders. Let them relax. On your next inhale, draw your attention to your hands. And on the exhale, let them open and be relaxed. On your next inhale, focus on your belly. And as you exhale, let it be relaxed and allow it to feel warm. Take one final deep inhale. Exhale out through your mouth. And go ahead and open your eyes. So that was just about 1 minute. I went 10 seconds over. And some of you may notice now that you are physically feeling different, but that you're also mentally feeling different. You may feel more focused on this presentation, I hope. You may find that some of the other things that you were thinking about and that you were distracted by have quieted. If not, that's okay too. So this is something that I do with all of my students every time we meet. Our program is entirely virtual still this year, so I have online meetings, and we generally open with a 5-minute guided meditation. So we meet for an hour, we meditate for 5 minutes. This is a 10-minute talk, we meditated for 1 minute. More is better, but that's okay. And there is a lot of evidence that led me to choose to do this with my students. This is some information from the National Wellness Institute, and it lists some of the dimensions of wellness that are improved by a meditative practice. There are 6 of them, and there are 4 that I personally believe are particularly connected to student success, especially at the community college. Emotional wellness and things like reducing anxiety and even symptoms of depression, PTSD, which is not on that list, but it is something that is documented. Their social wellness, especially their own self-awareness and their confidence. Of course, intellectual wellness is what I believe to be one of the most powerful things that guided meditation can do for our students. It's incredible what we know now about cognitive abilities, focus, attention, retention of information, and academic performance, not just on a sort of small day-to-day scale, but overall on the scale of a college career. And then there's also some really interesting information about occupational wellness and things like burnout, and confidence in pursuing different opportunities that we know can be helped by guided meditation. And so knowing all of this, I decided to give it a try. It started from a lesson on test anxiety and techniques to ease test anxiety, and students responded so incredibly strongly to it that they asked me if we could please do it every week. And so we do now. And it is something that is one of our really popular activities. We have a lot of repeat students that want to continue to participate in this guided meditation practice. They often pursue it on their own. They download apps or they watch YouTube videos to facilitate guided meditation on their own. And I have a lot of feedback from a lot of students that it's been really helpful for them in a number of ways. One thing that I think is really interesting is there's some recent research that shows that the earlier in a student's career you can perform these interventions with this meditative awareness, the better the effects are for them. So students are particularly receptive to learning these techniques and applying them earlier on in their career. So to me, that's just more motivation to bring awareness to these in the community college setting for sure. There are other mindfulness and sense of belonging interventions that we also offer through our community of scholars. We work on students with goal setting and identifying motivation through a lot of journaling activities, writing letters to people who inspire them that they can refer back to when they're struggling. And I only have about 1 minute left, but I do want to just show you some data on 2 interventions that I think are really powerful. This is not my data, these are from other papers, but I want to talk about normalizing struggle or normalizing transitions. And this is an activity where we make students aware that other people also had classes that were tough, or they failed a test, or they had to drop a class for some reason, and they turned out okay. Everything was just fine. It's super simple. A lot of people do it through video testimonials or letters. We accomplish that by just connecting students at different points in their community college career, informally and socially, give them the opportunity to say, hey, that happened to me too, and it worked out. But this is some data that I would like to share. This was a real game changer for me when I became aware of this. This is from a paper 2011 by Walton and Cohen. And this vertical line that you see here shows the instance of a social belonging treatment. Basically, they were shown videos of other students that said, "Hey, I'm graduating now. Good for me. But in the past, I really struggled with some of my classes, and I had to learn to study in different ways, and I failed some tests, and everything turned out okay." And you can see here that grade point averages not just improved for students who experienced this social belonging intervention, but they consistently improved throughout their 4-year experience in college. This was done in a 4-year college. And actually there's recent work that's come out that followed up with these same students a decade and a half later. And they also showed still long-lasting returns in their career, in their connection to their community. People were more likely to pursue local offices, local government offices for bettering their community. They had more leadership roles in their careers. And so when I learned about this, that taking 15 minutes out of your class to share some of this stuff with students could have such incredible return, I actually really felt very strongly that knowing this, that it would be negligent to not perform these interventions with our students. And so that's something that I've really worked to build into our LSAMP program. And I hope that it is working as it is intended and really helping our students feel connected so that they can persist throughout their community college experience and move on to, our program is focused on transferring to 4-year colleges, but wherever students may end up, whether it be workforce or transfer, this is something that helps everybody. And so I'm really passionate about including it wherever the opportunity should present itself. So I took a minute or two longer than I was supposed to, but I am happy to answer a question or two if you have them.
Thank you, Robin. This was amazing. You're not a biologist, but you're just part of our community college setting of goal setting, study skills, student mindsets. This is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Any questions for Robin? I mean, I do have a few. Robin, I'll have to get in touch with you separately. I have like a few questions for you. This is an area that I've been looking at when I'm discussing student mindsets as part of a research program.
I would love that. Yeah, I'm just robin.nagy@hccs.edu. So please reach out. I would be happy to share resources. If you're not comfortable guiding meditation with your students, I wasn't at first either, but there's a lot of other resources you can use so that you don't have to do it yourself.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And Robin, you could put some of these in the chat.
Sure.
Put it in the WUHA chat because that's what everybody can access.
Sure.
It'll be great. Yeah, especially the guided meditation and some of the literature, the one from Cohen. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. All
right, so we are hopping to the end and we have the best for the last, and that's my friend Stephanie Bloomer. I just want to take 30 seconds. She's an associate professor of biology at Oakton Community College. It is right here in Illinois. Her degree is in molecular and cell biology. What's interesting and very wonderful about her is her passion for improving STEM education in the underserved students. And you will see that in the project that she's going to talk about and how seriously she took this upon herself to be the champion at her college. And here is Stephanie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Sheila. I just, before I get started, want to say how much I've been enjoying everybody's talks today. Just such incredible work. I'm so excited I'm in your company. I am Stephanie Levy-Bloomer. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I'm going to talk to you about some work that we're doing at Oakton to institutionally improve persistence at the college. So the first thing I'd like to do is to give you just a quick overview of Oakton, 2 campuses. We are a community college, a 2-year. We offer both, as many community colleges do, career programs and transfer programs. We've got about 20,000 non-credit students, 9,500 credit. Most of our courses are taught by part-time colleagues, not full-time colleagues like me. And we serve about 500,000 people in Cook County, which is where Chicago's located, although we're in the burbs. So the work that I'm going to talk to you about, let me give you the overview. The goal of this work is to improve student persistence and success by developing relationship-rich interactions in and out of the classroom between faculty and students. And I want to just offer a couple of quick definitions because, you know, there were times where I would mix up retention and persistence as an early career professor. And so just in case, you know, they're not as distinct in mind on a Sunday morning for you either, retention is what the college does in order to keep students semester to semester. Persistence is what the students do to stay semester to semester. The two are not equivalent. So that's why I want to make that distinction. It's a lot easier, I would argue, for institutions to do things that can support students. It's very different when, as a student, the onus is on you and it's messaged as being so firmly on you, that sort of like lone hero messaging that is very popular in many cultures, but particularly the United States, rather than being supported by community. So persistence, we find to be even more concerning because we know that the message students have traditionally gotten is sink or swim, it's totally on you. So I'm going to do something a little bit different with my presentation. I know typically, you know, we talk through the interventions and then you get the data. I'm going to share the data first so I can convince you this is worth doing, and then I'll tell you what we did. So the sort of like 30,000 foot view is that what we're doing, we have 4 specific things that improve human connection in the classroom. They're focused on, again, faculty student engagement. And we've got a team of staff and faculty who oversee the work at the college. So let me just show you some data first, because I could give you the 4 to-dos and the rest is sort of like, you know, perspective fluff around that. So let me explain what you're looking at first. So we looked at students who had at least one persistence project course that they were taking, meaning one course in which they were getting the interventions I'll be telling you about in just a minute. Our overall, that is a summary, an average of the persistence rates for students in those sections comparable to the persistence project sections that weren't getting those interventions. So for example, I taught an introductory biology course, and that would be a persistence project course for the students who were in it. If I have a colleague who did not implement these interventions and was not part of this program, those students would not have gotten those interventions. So that's what we're looking at here. We were also concerned that for the persistence project sections, perhaps we were having faculty who were just great at what they did and they were self-selecting. So the data that you're seeing for our persistence project data are normed for those faculty and their persistence rates prior to participating in the project. So what we found overall, if you look at the green bars, is a fall 2019 to fall 2020 persistence rates. And you can see that they're around 50% for all groups, some higher, some lower. When you look at the gray bars, you can see increases for all groups. These data are disaggregated by ethnicity. While we're really excited that we saw increases for all groups, and we did, the green arrow here is showing you the difference between the students who were not in a persistence project section versus those who were. We still have some concerns, and hopefully you're starting to get some concerns simmering in your mind as well. The gains are not equitable. We don't see persistence improving for all students at the same rate. In order for equitable persistence to be achieved, for our Black students, we need a 12% increase in persistence, 10% for our Hispanic students. For white students, 9%, compared with the group that saw the top increase in persistence, or excuse me, the top persistence figure. So this is concerning because it's not enough that persistence rates improve for everybody. It has to be that everybody is able to pull their car into the driveway at the same time, right? So what this really did for us as we looked through these data and thought through them with anti-racist and equitable mindsets, inclusive mindsets, was, the deficit mindset, I think, is one that our institution, unbeknownst to itself, had been holding on to. And I think all of our institutions are, built on deficit mindsets and structural inequities to some extent. And the deficit mindset prior to really considering anti-racism and inclusion and equity would have put the onus on the student. So if we're seeing that not all of our students are accomplishing equitable persistence, the question we may have asked was, what's wrong with these students? Something's wrong with the students. They just need to work harder. They need more time. You all know, working in community colleges, being exposed to community colleges today, that's not who our students are. And frankly, it's not who a lot of four-year students are either. I don't have to tell you that our students are working and taking care of family and dealing with health challenges and potentially immigration challenges and a slew of microaggressions every single day that level them to some extent and make achievement a hoop to jump through, rather than an enjoyable process. So the way that our mindset has switched, and I would encourage everybody here to consider this, is what do our students need? What are the structural pieces at work here that are creating those inequities? It's not on the student. Our students need support. And so what the Persistence Project is doing is really getting into our classrooms and offering that support to our students. The key takeaways from our data I'll get to in just a minute, but I'd like for you to know that in the fall of 2019, we had about 125 faculty members participating. That number dropped a little bit with the pandemic, but we still have 150 sections of various courses across the college enrolled in this project, again, across 40 disciplines. And, the overall sort of number that we had a couple falls ago was 79% in the Persistence Project students persisted from fall to fall versus 63% for non-participants. Those data were really exciting to us. And what I want to do is just summarize what we learned from doing these things in the classroom and collecting institutional data. We learned that students in this project persist at higher rates. The impact is more profound for students of color, although persistence is not equitable. And we believe that there are structural, institutional, cultural factors at work that support that inequity. And we're committed to breaking those structures down, doing a thorough analysis to better understand them, and speaking with our students to understand what they need. One of the things that we've gotten out of this has been the creation of Oakton's Academy for Black Men, which will launch next fall, which provides our Black male students with an opportunity to create an entire new department that's going to serve them, will be staffed by our colleagues of color, will be focused on helping them identify when a microaggressions at work and how to get the support that they need to keep going and to be in front of them with that support so that they keep going, because there's a lot of things that happen at our institutions that are frankly not fair. And so I want to give you the four simple things that we do that made this big of a difference. And we feel to some extent that we've kind of come up with like the minimum required dose to really support persistence at the college. One of the things is so simple, I can't believe it's even a thing, and that's just learning the names of your students. Many people don't learn their students' names. How can you convince somebody that you know them if you don't know their name? If somebody doesn't use your name, they're in a way not respecting you. And so we really encourage all of our faculty to learn each student's name and use it. One of the most important things that we do is to conduct a one-on-one meeting with each student at the beginning of the semester. Now, we understand that this might feel sort of overwhelming for folks, but rest assured, you can always train your TAs if you have large classes to do this. We could talk more. We present our required high expectations clearly and make them, we structure our courses so students can actually reach those goals. And we provide early feedback so we can identify if our students need support and we can help our students get that support. There's some institutional assessments we do, but I'm going to pop forward here because I am out of time. These slides will be here for you. You can look through what we think our students get out of the meeting and what we do. And you can also read a bit about what our students have to say. Every student that we come across has felt like they've gotten some benefit. We've gotten some national recognition. What I really wanted to do is make sure that you knew that there was a slide here that can give you information about how this project can be used in your area. I know we have less than a minute, so I'd like to say thank you, and most importantly, provide my contact information so that if this is something you're interested in doing in your institution, you can get in touch and we can help. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So sorry I sped through the last few slides, but I think we're probably at time.
Thank you. I was just looking at when is it going to cut off the feed. So I wanted to thank each one of you for speaking, the panelists, Robin Nagy, Robin Carter, Stephanie, Rania. Thank you so very much for all of this. This wouldn't be so enjoyable without all of you. And of course, for Jeff, for motivating me and telling me it can be done for the first time in the Midwest. And we are not too far from the rest of the world. So it's amazing. So thank you. And we'll wait till the feed cuts off. They said the feed will cut off. So let's keep chatting like our classroom. I think you should put some of your information, Steph, the Chronicle and all of that in the watch chat.
Yeah, I can hyperlink it. Yeah.
And anything else, we could continue to converse through that, but I will also send out an email with all of our email addresses. If we wish to pursue or gain information from each other, it'll be great. Robin, you're way ahead of a lot of us, so we will be reaching out to you for many of the questions for cures. I think it's rumbling in everybody's head right now, the sense of belonging and the community college context. Thank you very much. And any questions for Steph till the feed cuts off? They said they would, but Robin. Yes.
Steph, I would be interested in learning more about this work. So if I send you an email, this is something that would be really important on our campus as well.
Yeah, please do. The meetings are transformative. But I don't want to cut people off, but there was a student who didn't trust me at all. A Black male, I tried, asking him about his interests, and I learned that he was interested in environmental science and law, and he had tried to take science classes, just intro, for like 3 years, and had dealt with so many microaggressions, he just couldn't get through. And nobody identified him as a science student for no other reason than what they could see. And so he's now my lab assistant. He's going to do an internship next summer. Our students need us. And I'm really excited about this because it really helps put you right in front of your student to help them get what they really need. It's really cool. I'd love to share it with you.
What I love about everybody's talk today, it's all about connecting with our students and helping them connect to the larger community.
Yeah.
And I'm going to steal all of your ideas. They're all great. I can't wait to try all of them.
Grab and go.
Yeah.
That's why they're here.
Yeah. And Robin, you should come up with just a daily meditation online. I would watch it. Yes. I would join you for your daily meditation with your class anytime.
I'll go viral.
Yeah.
I think you could. I'm not kidding. If you did daily meditation for the academic mind, just call it that. And I'll subscribe.
Awesome. And then kudos to Sheila for putting this all together. Sheila, thank you so much. I feel honored to be among this group and even more honored to be considered a friend. So thank you for including me today.
Oh, you're welcome. But I just wanted to do some outreach. I didn't know anything better than to give everybody in our area, especially the Midwest, what does it mean to be in a community college faculty? What does it mean to be our student? And what kind of work can we do? I think this is just the beginning because they never had a session on this kind of work before. But maybe all of us can just start to branch out, work with each other, collaborate.
Love that.
That'll be the best thing we can get out.
We're in the company of leaders. I can see I'm in the company of leadership.
Yes. Everybody is a leader in our classroom. That's what community college is all about, right?
Yeah.
So Rania, and thank you very much for those technology ideas, because I think equity in technology is a research question for the future. And all of those papers are all in the 4-year context. So
I thought that was amazing.
Yes. So are we
Definitely.
not getting cut off, or should we just say goodbye? Everybody's left. Is there anybody? Oh, 13
Yeah.
people are still here.
I'm the host, so if I'm gonna, when I end it, it'll end for everybody. So if you want to say your goodbyes, I'll go ahead and end it, and then everybody can jump to the next session if they want.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. It was great meeting you and working with you. Thank you, Sheila.
Yeah. And
You
thank you
too.
everyone who attended today. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for
thank
being
you.
part of our session on a Sunday morning, nonetheless. So thank
That
you.
too.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sheila.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Have a good Sunday. See you soon.